Taxpayer Talks is brought to you by Texans for Fiscal Responsibility and is made possible by generous donations from listeners like you. If you want to support our work, you can visit texastaxpayers.com/donate to make a tax-deductible contribution today. Thank you.
All right, everyone. Last week of session. Welcome to Taxpayer Talks. I'm 𝗚𝗪𝗠𝗠𝗏, president of Texans for Fiscal Responsibility, here with Jeremy Kitchen, our executive director. How you doing?
Hey, doing okay.
So we have what, five days left? Something like that?
Yeah. Who's counting? Yeah.
Yeah. So 𝗧𝗔𝗫𝗍𝗘, or the last day of legislative session, is Memorial Day, which is this coming Monday. And so we are recording this today on Wednesday, which is the last day for the Senate to hear bills. And so we're just kind of focusing on this episode. What's going on, what's died, what still has a chance, and kind of some of the things we've focused on. And so I think we want to start off with kind of been our main piece, which is property tax reform in SB 3. Jeremy, why don't you give us an update on where we're at on SB 3?
Sure. So listeners might recall, right, because we talk about it so often, that, at first it seemed like there wasn't going to be much property tax relief to come out of this session because the House and Senate could not agree on the approach, right? The House had their prioritized approach via Speaker Phelan and leadership there, and then you had Lieutenant Governor Dan Patrick, who had his prioritized approach. Both have passed, right, their priorities across to the other chamber. There was no movement on it. There was a stalemate. There were some childish memes that went back and forth for the last month. And then suddenly, the beginning of last week, it kind of broke through the House to where Senate Bill 3, right, that had already passed the Senate, got passed, out of the House Ways and Means Committee, made its way through the process, made its way through the House, and ultimately, was certainly headed in the right direction for Texas taxpayers. Ultimately became kind of a fusion of approaches between the House and Senate. It included the appraisal cap reform, the lowering of the appraisal caps. It included the maintenance and operations compression, which of course we favor, and it included a homestead exemption. In fact, it included a larger homestead exemption increase than that of when Senate Bill 3 left the Senate. And so where we're at currently, because we are now getting beyond these deadlines, is the Senate basically has to make a choice on whether they're going to concur with the House's version of Senate Bill 3, or if they're going to send it to what's called a conference committee here, and it'd be a quick turnaround on a conference committee, and they get to hash out or reconcile the differences before the end of the legislative session. So it does appear that there's potentially light at the end of the tunnel when it comes to property tax relief, and maybe something that taxpayers feel, but it's important to note that it is not a path to elimination.
Yeah, correct. And I feel pretty confident. I think you feel the same way, that we're going to get something, right? The question is how much, and is the Senate going to water this bill down? And I kind of want to talk about why they would water it down and what they've done in the past. And, from what we've heard, and this is speculation, right? The issue that they're dealing with right now is, did they allocate enough money in the budget? Which is we still haven't gotten the report on that, which we'll talk about in a minute. And so they allocate a specific amount of money. I believe it's around 10 to 12 billion. We don't know because we haven't seen the final, committee report on it. But that is not enough, we don't believe, to cover the fiscal note on SB 3. And so that's what people think. They're trying to reconcile this. Are they going to have to lower the homestead exemption? Are they going to have to reduce the amount of compression? Or are they going to increase the amount of allocation in the budget? That could cause problems with the constitutional spending limit. I think we're within about $1 billion, maybe $2 billion, depending on, or maybe $3 billion, depending on the version of the budget that comes out. We just don't know. That they would have to break that constitutional spending limit in order to allocate as much money as SB 3 is trying to give. And so,
or as we talked about yesterday, not to interrupt you, but cut somewhere else, right?
That would be the most practical, right? It's just like take away from, all this corporate welfare and all of it, or higher ed, or any of this other stuff that is being inflated with all this money. That would be the conservative approach, right? But I don't think either of us think that's their first option typically, right? Like their first go-to is good old government, right? And so that's where we're at with SB 3. I do think that it would just be so toxic for them not to pass anything. And so I think we're going to get something passed. But if you look at, like, for instance, last session and what happened with property tax reform, there was a big push for property tax reform, push for compression. And as it went along the process, the bill kind of just got weaker and weaker. They introduced, like, I think it was a COVID rebate. And then they ended up kind of reconciling bills like this. They went to conference, and then out of conference, they went to the homestead exemption, just increasing it from 25 to 40, like $15,000, which ended up being like $170 for the average Texas home. So we went from, I think, starting off the session to around probably $800 or $900. I'm trying to remember 2 years ago, but $800, $900 for the average Texan and savings. And then after conference committee report was over, we ended up with like 150 or 170, something like that. And so this is pretty typical, especially when it comes to things like property tax relief. And so are we going to see that typical trajectory where they come out of either I imagine they're going to go conference. Let's just put it that way. I don't think they're going to concur with the amendments. I could be wrong. I'm just speculating. But once they do go to conference, if they do, I think they're going to have to manipulate the bill in some way to make it work according to what their budget says. So yes, we will get something. The question is it going to get worse, or is it going to stay the same? I don't think it's going to get better, but yet again, that's speculation.
I mean, the last thing I would say on this is that, again, I think it's worth reiterating, the governor has completely been absent on this issue, at least publicly. I mean, he hasn't said anything, right? Even via social media or anything, really in like a month and a half. And, this is allegedly one of those emergency items, right, that he named at the beginning of session. He has not said whether he favors suddenly the newer version of Senate Bill 3. He hasn't tried to use the bully pulpit to really kind of push it over the edge or anything. It's kind of been a weird sort of thing for something that's allegedly a priority of the governor's, right? And I think it bears mentioning once again that he was originally very supportive, as he said multiple times, a path to elimination of school maintenance and operations portion of the tax, and he's been silent all session on whether or not that is something he supports. So,
yeah. Well, why don't you give us an update on HB1, the General Appropriations Act, the budget? We're still in the dark there. Why don't you explain what's going on?
I wish I had much of an update. I mean, I think the reality is that, this is the one thing they're constitutionally bound to do every session. And we, as we've said multiple times, right, even at the beginning of session when we talked about the budget process, that it would go to a conference committee. It always does, right? They reconcile the differences. They get permission to go out of the bounds, right? And consider stuff that maybe wasn't amended or changed, right, on the floors of each house and the House and Senate chambers. But I think the weird thing is that it's still in conference committee, right? We haven't seen a conference committee report, and we've got 5 days left of the legislative session. Now, I still imagine we're going to pass a budget, right? I think the question is how large is that budget ultimately? How large have we grown government? It is not a frozen Texas budget, which of course we favor, and we've talked about several times before. But as of this recording, we still have not seen a conference committee report. We still have not seen the final version of the budget. We don't know if it's going to be between the $302 billion as it passed the House or $308 billion as it passed the Senate, or if it's going to be even more, right, and come right up to that constitutional spending limit you talked about earlier. We don't know, to your point, how much has been it will finally be put towards property tax relief and that sort of stuff. There's still a lot of unknown with only 5 days left. And we say 5 days. The reality is it's only like 2 or 3 before conference committee reports have to be accepted. And so this thing's going to pop out here in the next day, 2, 3 days, maybe today. I don't know. And it's going to be a quick turnaround. And I think the thing I'd say on this before we discuss is, like, if I'm a lawmaker, and it very obviously seems like lawmakers just don't care, which is a shame. But if I was a lawmaker that truly cared about the budget, the one thing I'm constitutionally bound to do, I'd be frustrated that, like, I'm about to see this huge document get spit out in front of me and be expected to vote on the thing for the 9th largest economy in the world in just a matter of hours, right? Since it gets spit out. That's frustrating. Taxpayers should demand better.
Yeah, and you and I both being in the building understand, like, staff is under stress right now. There's a lot of stuff they're going through. We've been going through a lot of bills, which is very similar to what we did when we were in that building. And so to pile on top of that, oh, hey, by the way, check out this massive conference committee report and try and figure it out. I mean, I think most people, they're just going to kind of look at the bottom line, like, how much are we going to spend? And when we look at that, It's at, I think the Senate version was what, $308 billion, including federal funds. And so, you know, we've put out, you know, lots of charts and graphs on this kind of thing. And one of the things we've said over and over again is we were on track to triple our budget since 2000. I believe in 2000, we were around 90 or 95 billion for the biennium. And so we have absolutely, that would, tripling would be what, 270. And so we were almost there last cycle at 265, and now we're over 3. So we have more than tripled. Even if they, you know, they cut back a couple $2 billion, we have more than tripled our budget in the last 20 years. And population has only grown about 40% in that same that same time frame. And so even if you're you know, throwing in that inflation, you know, added, that conservative metric, that's usually about 2 to 3% per year, save the last couple of years, right? And so we're nowhere near a conservative trajectory on our budget. We have more than tripled it. And so, you know, even if they cut back, you know, to 306 or 305 or 304, we have grown our budget massively. This is why we were advocating for a frozen budget, because even if we didn't grow our budget at all, we still would be close to tripling our budget since 2000. And it's just not conservative. You can't pass a massive budget like this and say that you're for limited government. We've said time and time again that the way and the metric we use to see if we're growing government is spending. It's really that simple. And so if we're spending more money, we are growing government. And so for all of those folks who proclaimed that they're conservatives and that they believe in limited government, if you're consistently voting for more government through spending, and the budget would be one of those things, well, then you're being hypocritical because you do not actually believe that. Because if you actually believe that, you would vote against more spending and against more government. But here we are with that same status quo where, you know, we're limiting government by slowing the growth of government, right? And so that's not really limiting government at all. And so I'm interested to see the conference committee report, but I don't anticipate that there's going to be any major changes to it. They're probably going to shuffle some stuff around. Maybe, you know, they reduce it by a few $1 billion. Maybe that's how they make room for a little extra property tax relief. But it is a shame that we are, you know, 5 days to sine die, a few days to, and we haven't even seen it. We haven't even seen it. And correct me if I'm wrong, I don't remember waiting this long for budgets. I feel like it came out like
definitely comes out. Yeah, there's like a few weeks kind of lead time. This is the latest that I recall. Now, granted, I haven't gone and looked at the I can go pull that, but I don't remember it being in the final week of session that we see the conference committee report for this thing.
No, so I don't remember voting on the budget past the deadlines, right? But hey, you know, maybe we could be wrong.
Do you want to stay up to date with what the swamp is doing in Austin? Please like and subscribe and turn on notifications so you get notified of future videos with Texans for Fiscal Responsibility.
So we have that. And then, of course, like I said, we are recording on Wednesday, and we just put out our final intent notice in the Senate, and HB5, which is the corporate welfare program we've been talking about ad nauseum for the last few weeks, has made it on intent. And so it has today essentially to pass. And there is, I would assume, hundreds of bills on intent. I haven't even looked at the full intent calendar, but there's hundreds of bills on intent. And so there is no longer, I think there's a 1-day rule on intent that's expired already. So they can basically bring up whatever they want, whenever they want. And so the question is, are they going to bring up HB5, which is the replacement for 313 tax abatements? This is where we're giving, you know, major corporations basically, you know, no property taxes, or 90% property taxes on average for 10 years at the expense of taxpayers. And so, you know, if you watch the committee, I think _𝗏𝗏 mentioned things like possibly lowering that from 100 to 50 and maxing out at 50%. There's a lot of ideas, but I'm not convinced that's actually going to happen if they bring it up on the floor. I think they've proven that there's a very, very hard push from kind of the Austin establishment, which would include corporate lobbyists, to get this thing passed. And it's ultimately going to result in billions and billions of dollars over the course of the next, you know, decade, out of taxpayers' pockets into the pockets of corporations, many of whom oppose conservatives in our agenda and have been caught, canceling conservatives. And so it's a bad look for that reason, but it's even worse look because corporate welfare is not conservative and both parties oppose this. And so I don't know how it's going to shake out. What are your thoughts?
I mean, I think the cynic in me says that if it's going to be put on intent, it likely will pass. It was probably the subject of a deal, right, between the lieutenant governor and the House Speaker and, let's say, the governor, right? I think the writing is on the wall. The real question in my mind is just regarding timing, right? Let's say it does pass today. Of course, we're recording on Wednesday. It is in a different form than it was when it left the House. So it's going to have to go back to the House, and the House is going to have to say, okay, we accept the amendments, right? Or we go to a quick conference committee, right? Kind of the same thing as the other stuff. And time is of the essence here. Now, I don't want that to be construed as me like defending and wanting this thing to pass. Look, however this dies, we're happy with, right? At the end of the day, assuming it can die. I think the fact that it made it out of committee, the fact that it has been put on Senate intent, and the fact that the lieutenant governor hasn't really been vocal in opposition about it, I think tends to at least for me, bodes that the writing is on the wall that it will pass. Now, I think it says everything about how terrible this is that they are waiting until the last possible minute to do it, right? And I think Texas taxpayers should take note of that. But, who knows? Anything could happen. There were a lot of lieutenant governor priorities that died as a result of the House's inaction last night on the calendar. And so maybe as a result, he kills this thing on the Senate side. Yes, both are that vindictive, right? So I don't know. We'll see. We'll have updates obviously on social for anyone that's interested as this thing moves through the process.
Yeah, what's amazing to me on HB5 is, if you look at a lot of the other bills, it seems like all of these bills just have multiple problems with them where you're having point of order after point of order after point of order called on bills, a lot of them sticking. Last night, I think there was like 4 or 5 point of orders called kind of going into the last few hours. I don't think he actually ruled on them. They just kind of, I think, delayed the bills, right? But where's all of the point of orders for HB5, right? I think maybe there's 1 or 2 called in the House, but you would imagine if everyone is so sloppy and lazy with all of these other bills that there's probably multiple points of order on this. It's kind of a little too late for that, honestly, but it's curious how a lot of other really important conservative legislation tends to get called on point of orders, sent back into the process. But it doesn't seem like there's a whole lot of that going on with this specific piece of legislation.
I think this is worth talking about. It's been, as we both former legislative staffers, right? Like there's always points of order, right? Especially obviously in the House where it kind of matters a little bit more on how they approach these things in the parliamentary procedure. I was talking to a friend about this yesterday, the day before. I don't know that I recall this many points of order just like being called sustained, or this like weird practice, which is really just not transparent at all, right? Which is they negotiate something privately, right? So the general public has no idea what's being, they're waiting an hour while the point of order is being considered, right? And what something has been negotiated, they tell the author, right? They're like, hey, you're going to delay, potentially kill your own bill, and then this person's going to withdraw the point of order. So that way the speaker and leadership team kind of gets diffused accountability, right? They don't have to rule on the point of order and create precedent. And as people that you support transparency, you should absolutely be against that practice. I mean, and the real shame is that you of course don't have Republicans or more conservative lawmakers, right, appealing the ruling of the chair when there is a ruling, right, or demanding that there is one to begin with, that something gets put in the record. It's completely just non-transparent, and I feel like it's a practice that's gotten more and more abused the last few sessions. And as someone in the general public who just watches this sort of stuff, you just have to ask, like, what is happening, right? Like, if they really wanted to pass a lot of these conservative bills, they could. And it's a shame that they're abusing the process in this way.
I think what we've seen this session, all session long, right, is a lack of fighting, and I think it's just a complacent GOP, right? Especially those who proclaim to be kind of more right, more conservative. they've just kind of accepted the system as it is, and there's no really willingness to push back and to do things like challenge the ruling of the chair, which I believe takes, was it 25 members?
I believe so, yeah.
25 members to challenge. So, it wouldn't take a ton of GOP reps, and you would think on some of those, especially those more important social bills, right, that kept getting point of order and sent back to committee, that, hey, why don't we try and push back and challenge the ruling of the chair on some of these things? But there wasn't even, there's no fight in people. And so I think most Republicans, most conservatives across the state who elected this majority, if they really fully knew what was happening in the House, they would be extremely upset. And this might be the year they find out about that. We shall see. I think I want to kind of bring up what's going on with 𝗓𝗏 and this viral video and things like that. Of course, I've made a couple memes about it, in jest. But for those that don't know, and we'll likely show the clip here. There was a clip that was, I think, originally sent by Greg Price on
I believe so, on Twitter. Yeah.
And so he said, hey, is 𝗓𝗏 drunk, or is he having a stroke?
Mr. Speaker, I move adoption.
Mr. Campbell, send that amendment. The amendment is acceptable to the author. Is there objection to the opposite amendment? The chair has none. The amendment is adopted. The chair recognizes Mr. Johnson of Harris. Mr. Johnson of Harris to speak in opposition to the bill.
You watch the footage and 𝗓𝗏's like kind of stumbling over his words. He's kind of slurring really bad. And it certainly appears as though something's going on, right? Like either he's inebriated or maybe something else is going on. And so there was kind of speculation over the weekend as far as what was happening. There's been complete silence from the speaker's office. And of course, there's people in both camps, some people saying, oh, he's got a medical condition or he was just tired or this or that. I think, the general consensus of folks who are watching this clip, and it's on TikTok, it's on Reddit, it's on Twitter, it's everywhere, right? It's trending everywhere. Almost everyone is coming to the conclusion, man, he sounds drunk, right? Now, are we saying that? No, not necessarily. We're not coming to a conclusion, but that is what kind of the consensus of people has come to. And so then we had a new development yesterday. We're on Wednesday, so Tuesday. So Ken Paxton comes out and asks him to resign for being drunk. And so, what does Ken Paxton know? I don't know. Like, to be fair, like the House was investigating, or the investigating committee was kind of investigating Ken, and I believe the whistleblower nonsense, right? And so, so was this, Paxton kind of sticking 𝗓𝗏 in the eye? Does he have evidence otherwise? There's really been complete silence from the speaker's office. So they've refused to comment on this, which I would say is not a good look, right? If there really is something going on, if he had a stroke, or if he has some medical condition, or he crossed some pills or something like that, the right thing to do is to be transparent, right? I think if they come forward and kind of show proof, hey, here's what's going on, I think most people are like, hey, okay, we understand. Now we're not going to make fun of a guy for doing that. But the bigger problem, and I'll let you speak to this a little bit, is, we were both in that building, and we know, right, that they drink on the House floor. It is not a secret. They set up bars in the members' lounge or in the back hallway. There's been multiple members that have, like, I think 𝗏𝗏 was arrested for a DUI. Huberty was arrested for a DUI, also caught on the House floor, I think during budget night with that big Phoenix thing that happened years ago, drunk, right? And there's many, many other members where it's very well known that they're alcoholics and that they drink on the floor. We don't have to name all of their names, but it is a common practice that they drink on the floor, especially the closer they get to sine die, and everybody's kind of in a partying mood. And so, the accusations that he was drinking are not unfounded, but is there, definitive proof that he was? Well, no, there's not. And so we're kind of in this area of like a lot of speculation, but complete silence from the speaker's office.
Yeah, whether he was drunk or not, I don't know, right? I think people can watch this clip and kind of make their own determination there. I do think it provides for the opportunity to kind of just show taxpayers, Texans in general, how concerning it is, how cavalier lawmakers are sometimes, if not a majority of the time, with kind of their job and the way they pursue things. I want to be clear. I actually have no problem with anyone drinking. I mean, they want to have alcohol in their office, everything, that's great. I worked in offices where alcohol was in the office, right? And, you know, adults can make decisions, but at the same time, we should be electing people that, right, are adults about those decisions. You know, as the 9th largest economy in the world, you briefly mentioned it, right? But I think back as a staffer, the drunken escapades that I watched, not only lawmakers, but other staff, right, do on budget night, right? When they're considering, you know, at that time, $260 billion budgets. You know, taxpayers should absolutely demand better. I think the thing, you know, ultimately this kind of, if it's a back and forth between the speaker, his leadership team, and let's say people like Ken Paxton, is that all of this, what it should bring to light to people that maybe aren't avid watchers of Texas politics, right, in general, is that we need to do better. We need to elect better people in these positions, more responsible people, right? And, you know, look, at the end of the day, it's a personal responsibility issue. And I would hope that in the event that the speaker was inebriated, that he would say something about it, right? He would own up to that sort of thing. I would have a lot more respect for someone if they did that than just let kind of like everyone make their own assumptions and sort of thing. But thus far, we haven't seen any comments, right? Even denying it or anything like that. I mean, that's certainly concerning, but I think the most concerning thing to me, and what I'm glad has come to light, is that people kind of get to see this happen, right? Because it happens all the time. I can tell you as a staffer, I know you can say the same thing. The amount of lawmakers that I would all the time, right, would be yelling from their offices up and down the hallways, doing all sorts of just childish things as a result of their inebriation, is absolutely a thing that happens. Just because it happens outside the public view doesn't mean it doesn't. And we should just demand better, I think, is ultimately where I land on this.
No doubt. I think it's funny, or at least I found it comical, that, you know, although the speaker's been silent on this, there's been a number of Democrats who have come out and vehemently, either accused Paxton or defended Phelan, right? And you know, I think that just is telling on who the speaker's alliance is with, right? Because ultimately, I think most Democrats understand the dynamic of the speaker and how really all of the past speakers have come to power in the last few decades. And Democrats are completely dependent on a speaker that is friendly to them, to allow them to do things like they've been doing the last few days, which is chub off and kill conservative legislation, be real kind of wishy-washy on how we rule on point of orders and things like that. And so it's telling that pretty much that I've seen on Twitter, the only people who are coming out and like adamantly defending him are Democrats. The Republicans are kind of quiet. I haven't seen any of them come out and directly defend him and say, oh, this is just Paxton, right? And so I think that's telling that we have the minority party defending the speaker, but the majority party, for the most part, kind of being silent. Maybe they're waiting to see evidence. I don't really know, but I think Democrats know that if there was ever a speaker elected that was truly elected by the majority party, they're kind of screwed. Like the House would look more like the Senate, maybe even more conservative than the Senate, if there's a speaker that actually said, you know what, we don't really care about your agenda. We're going to deal with our agenda, and if we have time, we'll get to y'all. And so there's been this power dynamic in the House really since Joe Straus, which was mid 2000s, that has favored Democrats and favored their agenda. Now, not saying that Republican priorities haven't passed, but I would say that nowhere near as many conservative bills would die, and nowhere near as many, Democrat or kind of leftist policies would have been passed had we had a different speaker. Just my opinion.
Sure. I don't want to clutch my pearls. This session has been such a weird session, man. Like, you had taxpayer champion Brian Slayton get involved in something absolutely terrible, and it's crazy. All of the stuff that's happened this session. You have the speaker allegedly or potentially doing this too. You've got this Ken Paxton thing. You've got all sorts of other stuff just happening, percolating, it seems, behind the scenes. I don't know what it's a result of, but we should just, I think collectively it's a lesson in we need to elect better people.
Yeah.
Stereotypes
are stereotypes for a reason, because they're usually true. Politicians are shady. Let's just put it that way. Now, not saying that other people aren't, but the stereotypes are true. Like a lot of corruption happens. And I think that's just really a result of kind of our nature as human beings, right? Where money and power is concentrated, you're going to get corruption. And so I'm not saying I would be any different, or you either, if we were put in those situations. But that's a good reason to, change these folks out and not let people get, completely entrenched for 20, 40 years, getting fresh people in there who maybe haven't been corrupted over the last few decades. So so speaking of, session is over. We will have our last episode of Taxpayer Talks next Thursday, and we'll kind of break down the entire session. Another thing to look forward to is mid-June. We're thinking June 19th. We're going to release the Fiscal Responsibility Index. This is our main flagship. This is where we have spent countless hours, analyzing bills. We've noticed hundreds of bills in both the House and Senate, and we will be producing the index, which is an A through F score on how legislators have voted on fiscal issues or size of government issues. And so I want to encourage y'all to follow us on Twitter and Facebook, Instagram. If you have not, please subscribe to our fiscal note. This is where our weekly update, where we're going to keep you up to date with when we're releasing this. And of course, we'll have really a video we're going to do where we're going to kind of shoot for about 20 or 30 minutes, just kind of breaking down what happened in the session, who scored what. We're going to have some fun awards and things like that. And I think it's going to be great. It's going to be a great resource for those who are wanting to get involved in primaries. And you can see exactly how your legislator did. And of course, you can go to TexasTaxpayers.com to check out past indexes. So y'all be on the lookout for that. Subscribe to our emails if you have not. That will keep you up to date. Anything we're missing, Jeremy?
Nope, I don't think so. I think that covered it.
Okay. Well, hey, appreciate y'all being with us. Happy Sine Die for everyone who is in that building and for us in the coming Monday. I'm very excited we're here. And of course, we will see y'all next week with the final breakdown. Appreciate y'all. Have a good one.
Did you like this video? Make sure to hit the subscribe button down below and turn on notifications so that way you're notified every time Texans for Fiscal Responsibility posts a new video. Hey, you made it to the end of this video. Thanks for watching. We really appreciate it. Make sure you subscribe and hit the bell icon so that way you're notified next time we post a video and update to the channel. Thanks again.